Emma.
Yes, Madelyn.
What do you say when you have guests over and you've run out of drinking glasses, but in your effort to find those glasses, you've knocked something off of the top shelf and you need to warn people?
What do you say?
Well, Emma, of course you say, there's no more Cupheads! Hello, and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
Come on, that one was great.
The setup was pretty much funnier than the punchline.
Sometimes that's the point. Gotta go backwards to go forwards.
Fair enough.
Well, thanks for tuning in, folks. It's this week's full episode, the 101st episode, which is not as exciting as the 100th episode of Talk This.
Welcome.
I'm your host, Madelyn.
I'm your other host, Emma.
And we've got some interesting games to talk about this week, I think.
Yeah, definitely some interesting ones.
Interesting discussions to be had,
Yeah.
at the very least. You might not have picked it up from the intro joke, or maybe you did, but this week's games that we are talking about are No More Heroes, the Wii game from 2007, and Cuphead, the indie darling from last fall.
Was the fact that there was no more cups including no more heroes, or was that just a coincidence?
No, that was on purpose.
Okay.
There are much easier jokes I could have made if it was just going to be Cupheads.
I just realized that.
Oh my gosh. See, don't you feel like you should give me just a little more credit now?
Yeah, okay, yeah. Here's some credit.
Yes. I did it.
So, No More Heroes is our old game. Came out in January of 2008. Right? Yes.
I thought it was 2007, but maybe it was like just a delayed release and I was looking at the wrong thing.
Came out in Japan in 2007.
Gotcha.
North America was January 2008.
Well, that's what we care about.
Yeah. Sorry, anyone. If you're in Japan and listening to this, we care about you.
We do care about you in Japan. We just generally date our games based on their North American release.
Yeah.
Since that's when we theoretically could play them, although there's no way either of us would have been playing this game in 2008.
No. Else we would have had some negligent parents.
So, No More Heroes, it's an action-adventure game. More specifically, it's a hack-and-slash type game for the Wii, which we'll get to. But you can see how that might make sense for a hack-and-slash type game, that the Wii's motion control, which was at that point, one of the only kind of really popular motion control things going on. Do you remember that PlayStation 1? We had that PlayStation Wand thing.
The PlayStation Move.
No. Maybe that's not what I'm thinking of. We had a camera?
That was the Move. Oh, we did have the PlayStation Eye, you're right.
Yeah. So I guess that was around, but the Wii was really on the cutting edge, of course, of that kind of motion control stuff for the average gamer. And you can see how for a hack and slash type game, it might seem like the Wii would be a great fit.
Yeah.
But also, if you have any familiarity with the actual kind of gaming content that mostly appeared on the Wii and the kind of people that bought Nintendo Wiis, which I'm sure you do, who has not played on a Nintendo Wii?
Really, yeah.
Because there literally anyone in the world who has not touched a Nintendo Wii?
I don't think so.
I agree. Everyone had one, or their neighbor had one, or their cousin had, everybody had one. So if you're familiar with the types of games that are played on the Wii, it's mostly Wii Sports. That's mostly it for most people.
Yeah.
But it's mostly Wii Sports. Maybe you played some Mario or some Zelda or some of those other kind of classic Nintendo series.
Yeah.
And
probably picked up Super Smash.
Oh my god. No more leaks. But as you'll see, No More Heroes definitely falls a little bit outside of what you might normally expect to see on the Nintendo Wii.
It's rated M for starters. I didn't look, But off the top of my head, I can't even think of any other. I guess there were some zombie games on the Wii that were probably rated M, but I couldn't really
almost
think
doesn't
of
count.
anything.
You know, like, do zombie games almost shouldn't even count as rated M. Because everybody has seen zombies and zombie games. It doesn't really seem fair to label those as M for mature because we're just so desensitized to it.
Yeah,
at
I
this
guess
point.
so. But I couldn't think of any other, like, games off the top of my head that were for the Wii that were rated M.
I can guarantee that there are some.
I'm sure there are, yes.
But not any that anyone has played.
No. So No More Heroes was made by Grasshopper manufacturer, and more specifically, it was made by Suda51, who's a bit of a auteur, I guess.
That's exactly the word I was going to use.
Yeah. So in the game, you play as Travis Touchdown, and isn't that a name? Who's like a very stereotypical otaku internet troll type otaku.
Before otaku had sort of been reclaimed as an identity that people gave to themselves.
Yes. And he in the beginning of the game he wins a beam katana from an auction, which is pretty much a lightsaber. And ends up involved with the United Assassins Association, and is then forced to kill the top 10 assassins in order to prevent other assassins from killing him. That's the general premise of the game.
And I want to throw in there, like, the reason that he had to get involved with this assassination nonsense is because he ran out of money for video games and anime. Which I think is relatable. Right now, it's feeling especially relatable.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically what you're doing in this game is just running around, basically just killing everything in sight, right?
Yeah.
But with the eventual idea that you're gonna kill these 10 assassins and become the number 1 assassin and make a lot of money and potentially get to sleep with the woman who told you about all of this in the first place, and generally fulfilling all of your entitled male fantasies.
Yes. I read a lot of think pieces and reviews, so it was very much critically acclaimed when it came out. Like, it wasn't commercially successful either. I don't think even here or in Japan, but a lot of critics really liked it, and that's because it's sort of intended to be like a satire of violence in our video games, and specifically the sort of gritty action stuff that gives you, like, you know, the story and the complicated motives and stuff of the characters. When it's sort of just like, yeah, whatever, you just want to kill things, right? But it's sort of unique from the games that do that, because it's not saying, like, you're a terrible person for just wanting to kill things in your video games. It's just saying, like, you should be aware of that. Be aware of it yourself, accept it, and you'll be happier that way. Is sort of what it's trying to say.
Which I think that part is fine.
Yeah.
Right? I don't love that kind of rationale. It doesn't make me feel super happy about the human race or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But I think, like, if that's the point of your video game that you're trying to bring across, that, like, hey, we can pretend that you care about this narrative, but, like, you don't, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I can empathize with that to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's been a while since we've played Borderlands here, but I enjoy Borderlands, and I have no idea what I'm really doing in that game.
Yeah.
Like, I realize that there's some kind of a plot, and, like, I'm looking for the gates, maybe, right, or whatever it is, mm-hmm. but that doesn't really matter, right? And with all these zombie games that we're talking about that are maybe rated M on the Wii, but they shouldn't be rated M, right? Because everybody knows zombies. You know, I'm fine with just saying, like, they're zombies. I should kill them.
Yeah.
And I get that, and that's a fair argument. But I think a lot of the stuff that then goes along with that is really where my issue starts to seep in.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll agree with that. So I will say that, like, I do sort of agree with that message of, like, it's okay if you just want to play a video game and murder things. Like, that does not equate to wanting to murder things in real life. It's the same thing as kids playing, cops and robbers or war or whatever. It doesn't mean they want to do those things. It just means that they're playing, and that's fine. But I will agree. I feel like the choices it makes, narrative-wise, to relay that point, while effective, are perhaps not the best story points they could have used to make the exact same point.
For a game that is making the point that, story is stupid, it sure has a lot of, dumb story floating around.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm sure that's part of the point, but also, you still had to go to the effort to come up with all this, stupid, overdramatic story trappings to throw on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it really seems to me, when we get to the end, this game just, careens off the rails.
I mean, I do think that is also part of the point.
I know, but it's hard for me to parse, how much of that is part of the point and how much of it is just, a mess.
I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt of saying that things were, intentionally done for a point. I think maybe that some of the intentional choices didn't work in the end. I think that nothing's just, in there to be in there. But that some stuff doesn't necessarily work. It's not the concept, it's the execution, I think.
So, spoilers for a now going on 11-year-old video game.
Not sequel, some sort of new installment in the franchise coming out in January, though, on the Switch.
Yeah, I guess that's a nice little anniversary edition, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting. They've also there's some chatter about the first two being ported to the Switch, too. Yeah.
But spoilers, go ahead.
Okay. So here's what happens at the end of the game. And this is me, I have not played this game, right? I no longer have a Nintendo Wii, so I can't... Well, that's not true. It was ported to the PlayStation. But based on... the gameplay sounds a little bit complicated to me.
Apparently the PS3 version was buggier than the Wii version, too. So.
Oh. Well, I mean, I guess that sort of doesn't surprise me, given that they're trying to convert something that seems to have a significant motion control portion.
They did use the Move.
Oh. Interesting. Anyway, I guess I could have played it. Maybe? Do I need a Move to play it? Let's not analyze this too deeply. So I have not played this game. So I'm trying to kind of piece together portions of the plot here. So forgive me if anything is wrong. But I also don't think, that, what's his name?
Travis.
51?
Suda51.
Suda51 would care too much that I have not pieced together his plot exactly perfectly here.
Yeah.
I think I'm probably just making his point. So you spent the whole game, you've killed these top 10 assassins. Along the way, there have been a few kind of, flies in the ointment, little hiccups, right? Mm. So you've killed everyone. Except for assassin number 8, Shinobu, who you were you're not strong enough. Get stronger. This isn't enough of a challenge for me. Mm-hmm. Which, how did she get to number 8? But whatever. Seems like it's probably an act. So you've let her go. And also along the way, you met this guy named Henry, right? Yeah, Henry. Who also wields a beam katana / lightsaber. And so at the end, you're fighting the number one assassin, who has also sort of been, maybe claiming to be your father, right?
Yeah.
And you have to kill him, but then, right as you're about to kill him and get that kind of narrative satisfaction, a mysterious woman, scantily clad, as all of the women in this game are, swoops in and kills him on your behalf. Turns out, because of course... she's your half-sister, Jean, who you have hated for years because she murdered your parents for some reason. And also at some point we've maybe figured out that this UAA thing is just a whole big conspiracy to help you kill Jean. Mm-hmm. This is a tangled web I'm weaving here, people. So if you're not understanding, then Suda51 is winning.
Yeah.
So Good. Just take that. Carry that with you. Anyway, flashing back into the action. So here's Jean. She reveals herself. And then she tells you this, like, gigantic, over-the-top, very long, very complicated story about how, like, just this, like, her mother committed suicide, and then she was sexually abused by her father, and then she had to become a prostitute to pay for her assassination lessons. It's, like, very brutal stuff that would be incredibly disturbing, and is incredibly disturbing, but would be especially incredibly disturbing if you actually had to listen to it.
Yeah.
Instead, people really, like, you're not going to pick up on most, if not any of this, because the game decides at this point we're going to fast forward through this tale of everything that this woman has had to go through to get to this point, to survive, and just fast forward through to the end. Because, come on, what a loser you are for wanting to understand what's going on in your violent video game.
Yeah.
Like, aren't you just as much of a loser as any of these people?
Yeah.
Then that's where it really starts to go wild for me. So, like, it's one thing, like, we should talk about sort of the ethical and moral implications of, you know, fast-forwarding through this tale of just terrible sexual assault and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right? That's a problem. However, and this is not to give a pass, but of course, 2008, we've come a long way in the past 10 years on this kind of thing, especially if he had just tailored it down to just, like, she had a hard life, fast-forwarding through it, decent narrative device to prove what I think is, like, whatever, kind of dumb point, but valid point of this game.
Yeah.
So it's insensitive, and it's, like, wrong, and we should talk about that, and how it minimizes the stories of women and favors the stories of men, but we'll move past that for now. That's a longer discussion.
Yeah.
So then it just goes crazy, I think. It just goes crazy. I think we could stop the game there, and that would make the point, and that would be enough. That's my editing eye here. But now things go insane. Alright. So Travis kills Jean, right? Because that's been sort of the whole point of this whole thing, for him to kill Jean, who he hates. But at the end, like, he gets himself into trouble, and he's saved by Henry, who we met earlier, the other lightsaber wielder, user of the Force, whatever, who's apparently, because apparently now we've dropped into soap opera world, Travis's twin brother, and Sylvia, who's the lady from the beginning who got us into all this, who we've been killing all these people for the possibility of getting some with, is his wife.
Yeah.
And then they, like, Henry and Travis start to fight, and then we, like, zoom back and, like, maybe it's all just a painting?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, it's weird.
What? It's all just some little girl's, like, super violent, like, fantasy based on a painting?
Apparently.
Huh?
I mean, I think it's you know, the point, it's not supposed to make sense. It's not trying to weave together a narrative fulfillment or anything that really works. It's just there just because something has to be there, right? Or whatever.
But wouldn't it be more effective to just say, like, F that, something doesn't have to be there, and not play any of these games at all? By play any of these games, I don't mean, like, literally play video games. I just mean, like, don't even, like, to say, like, well, it has to be there, so I'll put something there.
I mean, perhaps it's trying to, like, you know, be like, you know, there's some greater meaning at the end of the game, or there's some greater point, and him is just like, it was all a painting all along. That's the greater point.
What a stupid, like, like, I'm sorry, ending your video game like Frasier is not, like, an acceptable... It's not acceptable.
It is hard to talk about because, like, it's not trying to have something that makes sense like a normal video game would. It's purposefully not trying to do that. So you can't be like, oh, this just narratively doesn't make sense, because it's like, well, yeah, of course it doesn't. It's not supposed to.
Well, right? You could still say that, though. Like, for as much as the point is it narratively doesn't make sense, like, I don't know, you can extrapolate some pretty disturbing stuff from that painting reveal at the end, right? Like, this is what this little girl is thinking about, seeing the painting. This incredibly depraved narrative. And that's what's inside us all. So, for someone who wasn't trying to make some kind of greater point, there's a lot of pretty disturbing greater points that you can come up with from that final reveal.
I guess that's true, yeah. I read like an article that was like, basically, No More Heroes is Star Wars if you replace Luke Skywalker with like one of those people who scream about Rey in The Last Jedi.
I think I read that one too, and yeah, I mean, he's like a horrible person, and not just because, like, really because, not because he's like murdering people, right? That's a genre thing. We'll do our same like Nathan Drake thing where we just sort of forget that he's just like killing left and right, right? Because that's the genre. And sure, maybe I could try to count that against him, but that would be kind of dumb because it's a gameplay thing. Not that, whatever, gameplay is storytelling, hi, that's what we do here.
Yeah.
But, like, also, like, fine, if the creator here wants me to just disregard that, fine. But, like, he treats women as objects just entirely throughout the game. The whole game is just this, like, gigantic, misogynistic piece of wish fulfillment. And I'm not surprised it didn't sell too well, because it's on the Wii.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
like, that's the thing that bugs me. Like, I get that he's trying to make a point through how terrible Travis is, and this amount of violence, and the lack of closure in the narrative, and the, like, you know, fast-forwarding through the villain's motives. And if you just say all that without dealing with the content of it, like, that's a solid success, I think, in trying to make his point, right? If you ignore it, like, the content of all of that, and just put out, like, what he uses to make that point, like, the physical actions of design that he did, like, that, it works.
Yeah, but and I want to jump in for just a minute before you go into your but, because for a game that sort of, like, doesn't really want to believe in gameplay as storytelling, this is a very successful use of gameplay as storytelling if you're just looking at the bare bones, right? Of, like, say, like, it, like, is almost a self-defeating prophecy, right? Because it really does make a good point for, like, yo, like, it can just be gameplay. We don't need the story. But then it, like, does that.
Yeah.
So it's just this, like, endless circle.
I guess
anyway.
That is true.
So, continue.
But the fact that he constantly uses, like, misogynistic, horrible, sexist, terrible woman characters who just drool over Travis all the time, like, it's uncomfortable. And I feel like, particularly with the fast forward at the end, like, maybe it would have made your point better if it was something stupid and ridiculous, right? That you fast forwarded through, as opposed to something actually, like, horrifying. So why bother, like, putting, like, all this sexual violence into her backstory when you're not trying to say anything about sexual violence? Like, he inserts a lot of, like, really misogynistic stuff, but unlike, like, the stuff he does critique, he just seems to plop that in there, like, without really thinking about what it's saying, right?
I think that, because I can't think of any examples of games that do this on purpose off the top of my head, I think it's very difficult to create a main character who is, like, misogynistic or racist or homophobic or take your pick of any kind of discriminatory bias, right? It's really hard to create a character that is your main character that holds those views without it appearing gratuitous or like you are holding those views, right? Can you think, like, I would be interested to see a game that interrogates its, like, main character's racism, for example. However, You know, there's a lot of racial violence that is already depicted on television, and that's incredibly just like psychologically damaging to people to have to be exposed to that at all times, right? So how would you even create a character that maybe does those kinds of things without falling into perpetuating this kind of constant depiction of this like racial violence or sexual violence or whatever?
I don't know, Madeline. That's a huge question.
I know that's a huge question.
I mean, I'm firmly of the belief that if you're including something like racial violence or sexual violence, then you have to be careful how you frame it, right? Like, even if you're using it for a purpose, like if your cinematography is a certain way, then it's going to come off a certain way, right? Mm-hmm. So even just the idea of crafting it is really hard. And it has to have a point beyond shock value or just traumatizing a character, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you could traumatize a character in a million different ways, so why are you picking this one? I mean, that's the case with really anything you want to include in your story. Like, why is this happening as opposed to this? Right?
Yeah, and I think that that's the really big problem. Well, there's a lot of really big problems with its inclusion in this game, but one of the really big problems is that if you're being charitable, which I think it might be a little too charitable, but if you're being charitable, you might say, oh, they included all of this to show, like, just to continue to build upon that Travis is really terrible, right?
Yeah.
He treats women like crap. He doesn't care about this incredibly intense story that this woman is telling him about why she did something, right?
Yeah.
He sees them as objects. I think that that is likely too charitable of an interpretation for this kind of hyper-masculine type of game. But if we're being charitable, that's why they put it in, and that's just sloppy.
Yeah.
Like, there are easier ways to make me hate this person than to victimize a bunch of, like, nameless women.
Yeah. I mean, I do think they are trying to make Travis that, like, you know, stereotypical, like I said, that person who is this
piece
way.
Of internet garbage.
Yes, this piece of internet garbage. And all the things he does are very much inherent to pieces of internet garbage, right? So I'm not arguing necessarily with his characterization. I just think that while it critiques the games it wants to critique, but it doesn't critique the player at all either. So if, like, Travis is the player's avatar, if we're saying somewhere in us we all have a little bit of Travis, like, it's not
right. It doesn't tell you that the way he treats women is bad.
Yes.
It says,
it doesn't
you
make
do this, really.
It doesn't make a good separation between, like, the game world and the way you should actually act in the real world, right?
And it's cheap. I'm sure the designer's response to that would be like, well, I wasn't trying to tell you how to act in the real world.
Yeah.
But, like, that's cheap. You made a piece of art. Like, sorry. Like, maybe he probably doesn't consider video games art, but, like, fight me on that. Like, you made a piece of art. People are gonna take something from it. Like, you don't just get to say, well, no, there's nothing to take from it.
Yeah.
Anyway. I really would be interested, though, to see a game that really interrogates that kind of culture.
Yeah. I think it's really necessary nowadays. It's like, you know, it's a really hard task to take on, right? Like, even the thought of making something that's trying to interrogate that culture is like, well, there's not very much room for error, right?
Yeah.
So that's very intimidating. I can understand why people haven't tried to go there yet, especially with the amount of time and investment that goes into making a game.
It's 100% the right avenue for it, though. I mean, I think if there's going to be a piece of media that does this successfully, right, it really has to be a video game.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe in 5 years. Maybe someone is just starting on this right now.
Yeah. You owe us royalties if we inspired you.
Yeah, seriously, if you're listening to this right now and you're like, yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna dismantle the toxic masculinity of internet comments with a video game.
Yeah.
Then please give us royalty checks.
Please and thank you.
Doing your part to support female gamers worldwide.
One last totally tangential, unrelated thing. I read that, like, Travis has a cell phone, and when it rings, like, your Wii remote rings, and then you have to actually, like, hold it to your ear like a phone.
That's weird.
I think that's awesome.
I mean, very cool, but, like, what a weird little mechanic to throw into this game.
I know, but I think it's awesome. I love games that make, like, little things like that. Like, in Transitor, like, you're on the PlayStation version, like, your sword talks to you from your controller until, like, a pivotal moment in the narrative. Like, that's really cool. Even, like, the Wii U, like, sometimes, like, the thing you hold in some games was, like, your phone, and you would navigate, like, your text messages on it while the game was up on your screen. Nintendo hardware is always, like, given a lot of room for experimental use of the hardware in your game. So, props to Nintendo.
Remember the mashup game we made, like, way at the beginning with Burnout, where you're, like, a driver and it's tracking your heartbeat, and
Yeah.
you have to use your real cell phone?
Yeah.
Who's gonna give us a call about that?
So anyway, speaking of difficult things.
Oh, wow. That was a rough transition, but go ahead.
Go from difficult, one meaning of difficult, to another meaning of difficult. Cuphead!
Woo!
Madelyn, why don't you tell us about Cuphead?
Absolutely. So Cuphead is a run and gun video game. Love that name for a genre, run and gun. It was released in September of 2017 by Studio MDHR. Probably stands for something. Don't know what it stands for. And basically, if you've heard of Cuphead, which if you follow games, you've probably heard of Cuphead, it's mostly known for its extreme difficulty. What most people consider fair difficulty, but it's extreme difficulty.
It's also a rare beast called the Microsoft exclusive.
Whoa.
When's the last time you heard that?
Seriously. So it's a Microsoft exclusive, which means I cannot play it.
It's on PC. I mean, you have a Mac. Never mind, you can't play it.
But which is a shame because it has local co-op. Which, like, but this would be a bad game for me to play local co-op with anyone, because I think it's too hard. Anyway, you play as Cuphead, and if you're playing two-player, you play as Cuphead and Mugman. And you basically have to fight through all these levels. So you're Cuphead and you're Mugman, and you're living under the watchful eye of Elder Kettle. So it's just like a whole tea kind of aesthetic.
Yeah. Which
I'm into, you know.
Honestly, Madelyn would be super into this game if it wasn't so hard.
Can we have an easy setting? Anyway, and one day, you, Cuphead, and maybe your brother Mugman, you go to the casino, and you find yourself gambling with the devil. Because, of course you do.
As you do.
Yeah, as one does. And you're having a pretty successful time. You're beating the devil for a while, which is just what the devil wants you to think. And then you get to a final round, and the devil is like, hey, why don't you bet your souls this round?
And you're like, that's a good idea.
There's, like, some kind of reward. Like, you would get a good thing if you won, but I don't remember what it is. Because, of course, you then throw snake eyes, and you lose, and you're gonna lose your souls. But fortunately, the devil's an enterprising guy. You know, he's into the gig economy. He's into outsourcing his work to contractors. So he says, hey, dudes, I could take your souls, or instead you could become my, like, soul postmates and go pick up the ones that are outstanding from other people out in the world. And of course, because you don't want to lose your own soul, that's what you go and do. So you fight through levels to repay your debt to the devil by fighting various bosses. And that's pretty much it. After that point, it is just brutally hard.
Yeah. It has a very distinctive art style, very old style cartoon look. Apparently it's rubber hose animation.
From the 30s, like the old Disney cartoons.
Which is, like, referring to, like, their skinny little arms and legs, apparently.
Also got into a little bit of hot water over that choice of animation style. Hot water, that's funny for Cuphead, not even on purpose. Just because that style of animation is very much associated with like, minstrelsy and racist cartoon depictions of stuff. And they got into a little bit of trouble about, can you really separate this art style that is so steeped in racism from that content? Can you just take the art? Which I thought was an interesting discussion.
It is interesting. I don't feel like I can speak intelligently on it. But, yeah, it's interesting.
Like, it's hard. I don't know. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth here. Of course, this art style does not jump out to me immediately as, like, racist, right? Just because I don't really know that much about cartoon history.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that it would if you knew more about it. And so it's hard to think of anything analogous. I'm like, what is, I mean, like, there's blackface, but I feel like that is too well known to really be a good analogy here. Like, of course, blackface is bad. Like, you can't take that and divorce it from its racist.
Yeah.
But it also feels like, well, it's just blatantly racist. Like, of course you can't. Whereas with this art style, it's like, if you didn't know, nothing about this would jump out as racist, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would love to have somebody write in and talk to us about this, because, somewhere in my gut, I'm like, yeah, of course they should be able to divorce it. Like, it's just an art style. But I realize that is mostly coming from a place of ignorance, where this art style does not jump out to me as being anything but art.
Yeah.
So, that was not like a huge controversy around the game, but it was enough that they had to kind of address it. And, they kind of, like, feigned ignorance. They were like, we like the art style. We're not super aware of anything else around it.
I mean, I'm sure we're like that, so I'm sure that's actually the truth.
I know, but I also know nothing about the style, and they know enough about it that they, really liked it and wanted to emulate it.
After I said that, I realized, like, well, they know that this is an art style, so that's already a step above us.
Seriously. Anyway, it's a cool-looking game. Maybe that coolness is steeped in some really troublesome roots, but it's definitely very visually distinctive.
Yeah. It also has, like, that, when you go to the boss, it's got those very, like, cartoon, like, title things that go across the screen, like Looney Tunes type thing.
Which is cute.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's great when you're seeing it for the 100th time.
So it's, like, not just its art, but, like, its sound design, the text, typography, it's all very old school 30s style. So they're very consistent in that. Yeah. Mostly, it's hard.
I mean, they've sort of made the point, and I think that the 30s aesthetic, obviously there were no video games in the 1930s, but bear with me here, is a harkening back to an old school aesthetic, is also mirrored in this harkening back to an old school style of game where the story is very much secondary to the gameplay. Mm-hmm. Which is an interesting parallel with No More Heroes. Mm-hmm. In a very different way.
Mm-hmm. So basically, it's like a series of bosses. Some are harder, some are easier, but all are relatively difficult. And essentially what you do is you and your partner, or just you, if it's just you, like, dodge attacks while also, like, finger gunning at the enemy that you're attacking. Like, at the end, when you die, it'll, like, show you how far you got. Which I think is a nice feature. At least you know how much progress you made.
Ooh, unless you got so close.
Yeah, I guess that's true. So, yeah, they'll have, like, different stages that they'll go to as you get to different levels of damage. Yeah.
And you have unlimited lives. You know, it's not so hard that we're doing the, like, Mega Man thing, right?
Yeah.
Where you're gonna have to go all the way back to the beginning.
It's just limited to the boss you're on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which,
but you can't take very much damage because your glasses. So I guess that makes sense.
That does make sense. Still, I appreciate the trend now in these kind of games that are really attempting to be difficult, of, like, at least you're not going to have to do the whole game again. You know, we're not totally going all the way back to those days. So, that's something. Although, again, I really, like, this is not a game that I should play. I think this game would cause a real peak in my stress levels.
Yeah. And not just in an overcooked way. In a real way.
Not just in a destroy my relationship way, but in a just a destroy my own brain kind of way. So, I want to talk about this, harkening this, like, these two different ways that we deal with storytelling not being as important as the gameplay, but I also do want to talk about this difficulty level. So, Emma, what do you think about this requirement that this game be incredibly hard?
It's a hard question, honestly, because I do think that difficulty can be an effective way to tell your story. Like, a difficulty spike, for instance, is a way of instilling tension or communicating to the player that the stakes have been raised or something like that. And it makes sense that just fighting for your life with a deal for the devil would be something that would be very difficult, right? And I also don't want to, like, a lot of people play games that are challenging because that's what they want. They want to feel the accomplishment of having, like, solved the puzzle, right? Because it's a run and gun, yes, but it's also kind of a puzzle game. You figure out how to do it.
You have to be so exact that it really is more of a getting it in your muscle memory puzzle.
Yeah. So you figure out how to play it, and then by the end you feel that satisfaction. And there's a lot of people who really enjoy that style of play. Not necessarily us. I mean, I do enjoy it to a certain extent, but once it gets past, like, 3 or 4 times, like, it gets a little hard.
Yes, I enjoy it to a moderate difficulty level.
Yeah. But then again, there's this issue of, like, accessibility, right? Which is so much of a harder thing in games than it is in any other medium. Because there is actually, like, a physical act of playing. So, like, with movies, you might be hindered if you cannot see or cannot hear, but there are ways to get around that. There's just visual descriptions and subtitles, right? And those are the two issues that really impact whether you can see, like, a movie or a TV show. But with a game, any sort of physical disability is also something that has to be addressed if you're trying to make your game accessible, on top of the ones for audiovisual. So there's a ton more identities and conditions that you have to be prepared for. And I don't know. I mean, I'm for accessibility, yes. But what is the point of Cuphead if you lower its difficulty?
Well, here's my thought. So, I'm with you on, like, 80% of that, I think. Of course, accessibility is much more difficult in games, and that's something, for people with genuine disabilities, I think that finding a way to make the game accessible is important. Right?
Yeah.
But what I'm also interrogating here is just, like, who is this game for? Right? So, not every game has to be for every person. It has to be playable by every person, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's different than it being a game that's really meant for everyone.
Yeah.
So on that level, I think it's fine to say, hey, look, this is a hard game. If it's too hard for you, maybe you shouldn't play this game.
Yeah.
However, in a game like Cuphead, where the difficulty is so integral to the gameplay experience, right? It's obvious that they designed this with the idea that it was going to be very hard.
Yeah.
You would think that as designers, they would have sort of a ideal level of difficulty that they designed it at, right?
Yeah.
I have to imagine this is a very hard thing to do as a video game designer to calibrate difficulty.
Balance is really hard. And
so in a game like Cuphead, you know, again, and like in any game, you have some kind of like, here's the level, like I want the difficulty to be at like 90% for the player, let's say, right? But the difference between 90% and 100%, or like 110%, is a lot. So what do you do if, Cuphead is at the ideal 90% difficulty for, you know, a bunch of or let's not make it 90%, let's say 70%, just so I have more to go, right? Let's say 70% very hard, but still doable, right? Mm-hmm. And so for like about half of gamers, you know, Cuphead is at like 70% hard, exactly where it's supposed to be. But then for other people that buy the game, well, maybe it's too easy. Maybe there are some people that are really, really good at this, like 5% of people, and they're not really getting the experience that you wanted them to because it's too easy for them, and that's not really what the game was supposed to be. And then there's the other 45% of people for whom it is harder than intended. Now that's fine if it's within like 10%, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's a little harder for them, but they're still kind of getting what you wanted. But beyond that, are you writing off those players? Or even if they're like sort of enjoying it, but they're not enjoying it quite the way they were meant to, not having any wiggle, like, I don't know. I'd be interested.
I mean, every game is made for an intended audience, right? You don't make a game intending that every single gamer in existence is going to buy it and love it. That's just true. Unrealistic in every way. Even if it's just a matter of, like, you know, when you design God of War, you're making that for PlayStation players. And there's a difference between people who solely own a PlayStation and people who solely own an Xbox. And that's not just, like, a console wars thing. It's just, like, a person who has a PlayStation and a person who has an Xbox has different gaming ideals, right? And a person who only owns a PC has a different one, and a person who only has a Switch has a different one.
And not even just ideals, right? Even if we go a level less deep than that, they just have different gameplay experience.
Yes. So that's just at the most basic level. And then you get to genre, you get to people who have the time for this game, you get to people, you know, you can narrow it down. And they chose to use difficulty as a way to target their audience. I don't see a problem with making a game that's for a specific audience.
That's true. I just feel like, well, I guess difficulty. You're convincing me, but
and
I also just
I really hate people. I mean, unless a game is just like, and even then, like, you can be angry at someone for making something bad, but like, you chose to buy it, right? You don't get to go into a movie and be like, I didn't like that, I demand my money back.
Sometimes people do, but yeah.
But that you can't, that's not something you can do. You made the conscious choice to go in there. And if you didn't like it, then you didn't like it. You know? And you've made a mistake with your money, and you won't make that mistake in the future. But it's the same thing with anything else, you know?
No, I get that. And I feel like just because difficulty these days is so rarely used as an excluding factor, right? Almost every game has some kind of a difficulty setting. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, and it feels weird and a little bit bad. But I don't think it's wrong. I just think it feels uncomfy. Because I'm very much always for, like, casual gamers being able to get into stuff.
Yeah.
But also, so we're talking about the movies, right, and video games, and these are two areas of culture where, I mean, yes, in general, the role of the critic and the power of the critic has declined over the past few decades, right, because everybody has an opinion. But especially, I think, in video games, the video game critic still has a pretty large amount of power, especially for indie games like Cuphead. Right?
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to hear about this game unless I read a review, really. But also, like, I'm trusting the critics to tell me whether or not, like, to give me enough information for me to decide whether or not I'm going to like it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Cuphead is an interesting case because, you know, if you're an experienced gamer and you're ready to grasp this kind of difficulty, I imagine it's a pretty great game, right? Got a lot of accolades, that kind of thing. However, I do wonder how many people with this kind of game were maybe a little bit, like, all the reviews are all about how difficult it is, right?
Yeah.
But also, all the critics who are playing these games are people that can, like, tolerate that and probably have an above average level of video game skill.
Yeah.
So I just wonder, it's tough in a game that's all about difficulty as a critic whose threshold for that is probably higher than the average gamer to give a review that gives people, like, an adequate, you know what I mean? I just think it's a particularly interesting and difficult case to decide whether or not this is a game that you're going to like without having played any of it.
I guess so. I think if a video critic is saying it's really difficult, that's a sign for me that I should stay away from it. Because I'm aware that they have because they do that for a living. They play games for a living, so I'm pretty much aware that they have a higher threshold for that than me. So if they're saying it's difficult, it'll be super difficult.
That's fair, but if they're saying, like, it's difficult but fun, I think that's harder. That's harder to parse.
Well, if they're just saying it's difficult but fun, that's not a very good review.
I know.
Why is it difficult? Why is it fun?
Okay.
What makes
Obviously,
it
that's
for
not
you
the whole
personally
review.
fun, and why would it maybe not fit other things? So write good reviews, and also, you know, you don't get to blame the critic either when you buy it and you don't like it.
Well, speaking of things that you'll buy and won't like, shall we try to mash up these two games?
Oh boy. We don't have very much time for this, so that's bad. Speed
round. Difficulty level at extra.
I know.
Expert.
I guess that's being brought in, huh?
Okay, so here's something that's interesting that overlaps about them. Cuphead harkens back to a time before storytelling was as important to games, right? And it was mostly about the gameplay. Uh-huh. Whereas No More Heroes kind of steps forward to a kind of a post-storytelling revolution time of, like, wasn't it better? Like, can we stop pretending we care about story?
Yeah.
Which is an interesting combination.
Yeah.
And I really want to take, like, I think this has been, like, the most woke episode of Talk This we've ever recorded. So I want to capitalize on that to mash these games together into something that is, like, not sexist and racist and, like, terrible.
Okay.
Right, I want to mash them together and then flip it on its head to be empowering.
Okay.
This is a high bar.
This is really hard.
Okay. So, you play as a gamer, and it's a run and gun.
Okay.
And you've been given an assignment that you have to take down the top 10 internet trolls.
Okay.
And if you do, you'll be rewarded with, like, something disgusting and misogynistic and racist.
Okay.
Right? But as you take them down, you start to realize that these people are, like, they're you, and you've talked to them online before, and, like, you're part of this culture. And it's very difficult for you to realize this. This game is very hard. But as you work through it, you become more empowered, and you reach the end, and something moving happens.
What if you're actually taking on your own internet personas from across the years? So,
wow.
like, your embarrassing middle school self to your high school self, to your college self, to your adult self online.
Interesting.
And you're awakening to a new online persona who is open to the ideas of others.
Persona!
And realizes that behind their avatar, there's a real person there.
At the end, you delete your Facebook and you cancel Amazon Prime.
There you go. Yeah, that's it. There's
That's
something
nice.
there. That's
You'd have to start.
That's a journey of self-awareness and awakening.
It would be
right?
like this would be very dark, and I would worry about anyone making this game. But it would be interesting to. I mean, there's just so many different like dark ways that could go, and things you'd have to interrogate, right? It's a tricky game to make, but it would certainly be interesting.
It's like the internet ghost of Christmas past and future.
Perfect. Great family game for the holidays.
So you're the young modern day equivalent of Scrooge, is what you are.
Right. And you're like going through the past, you're like, wow, look how I was so casually homophobic in middle school.
Yeah.
And look how entitled I felt to the attention of women in high school, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then the last would be like, this is what you'll be if you don't change your ways, Scrooge.
Right, you get into the future eventually.
Sad and alone on your couch. That's what she'll be.
I feel like there really has to be a really moving ending.
Yeah.
I don't quite know what that would be.
Delete Facebook, obviously.
That's true. Delete Facebook. Delete all your Reddits. Leave Twitter.
Etc. It's got some workability. I don't know if we really have the time now to iron it all out, but it's got something to it.
Alternately, you are a like queer, non-binary person of color just destroying men. Just with your sword.
Why not?
The devil has told you to do it.
The devil told you.
The reckoning has come.
Yeah, that wouldn't bring out those non-awoken internet trolls out in force or anything.
Can you imagine if Travis Strikes Again, No More Heroes is just like complete 180? Like,
I don't think it will be.
He's woke now.
I don't think it will be, but that would be a nice surprise.
Like, could you imagine though? Twist of the century.
Why don't you give us the spiel, Bound?
For what?
For
our social media. I thought you were like, pitch me woke Travis. No. And I was like, I'm in too deep.
No.
Alright, folks, if you like what you've listened to this week, you should follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, even though we just told you to delete them. We're on all of them. It's Talk This Podcast, so definitely check us out there for our thoughts on games, memes, and the latest on what's happening on our YouTube and on our blog. We're also on YouTube. There, we're at Talk This Sisters, where you can find our flagship YouTube series, Play This, where Emma examines gameplay as storytelling, which we talked about a fair bit this week. There should be a new one coming up sometime in the next couple weeks, right, Emma?
Yeah, probably once school ends.
Cool. So look for a new Play This sometime in mid to late December. Nice holiday present for you from us. There's also the Clickbait Boyfriend mini vlogs and various other little videos we post up there from time to time. You should also check out our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read more about us, see the games in the hat that we're about to pick from, and read up on our blog, where you'll find weekly updates from Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen, as well as other long-running series like Buzz This, X Thoughts in X Hours, and the occasional holiday-themed content. Let's see what else. If you like the show, really the most important thing is that you keep listening. So you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and more. So while you're there, why don't you click subscribe so you never miss an episode on Sundays at noon, and leave a rating and a review. We love that stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's the spiel.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So you ready to pick some games?
You know it.
Alright, so our old game is X-Men Legends.
Yes!
Finally.
Yes!
It's been in our hat forever, basically.
Oh, man. That's going to be a great... Will I be home? No, I don't think I'll be home yet.
That's disappointing.
Oh, well.
Well, look forward to us nonsensically ranting about our childhood.
Deep dive into our childhood.
And our new game is...
Ba-da-da-da.
No mini web tool. Leave me alone. I will not whitelist. is
That's
A
my
Way
game.
Out.
A Way Out. Haven't heard of that one, but that's okay, because I do not have to research X-Men Legends.
There you
Done
go.
all the research I need.
Anyway, look forward to that, but next week we'll have a side quest first. So yeah. I hope you don't become an assassin this week.
Low bar.